how you came here, if you came alone or with others, you are welcome here. No matter who you love, or how you speak, or whatever your abilities, you are welcome here. Whether you came with laughter in your heart or tears in your eyes, you are welcome here. If you come with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands, then you are indeed welcome here. Universalist in Lacombe, Louisiana. Together, we are the Greater New Orleans Unitarian Universalist, or GNU. This congregation has gathered in love since 1833 to seek wholeness and work for justice in the world. I am Linda Hardy, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. If you are a visitor, we invite you to raise your hand so we can greet you. Or if you're watching via live stream, if you're watching via live stream, please wave or say hello in the comments. Welcome. We are a lay-led church charged with the mission to offer joyful, mind-expanding worship services, provide opportunities for fellowship and spiritual development for children, youth, young adults, and adults, promote social change, and inspire service to the larger community. On Sunday mornings, we aspire to fulfill that mission by inviting UUA ministers, other religious professionals, and leaders from community organizations working for social justice, as well as our own members, to be voices of hope. Providing that voice today is our own Michael Martin. If you would like to know more about programming for children and families, Katie Gelfand, who is our Director of Religious Exploration, and is not with us today, so is your person to ask. The RE classes are on break for the summer. After the time for all ages, children and youth are welcome to spend the service in the nursery or here at the all ages activity table at the back of the sanctuary. I want to remind everybody that all of the words and lyrics for the chalice lighting readings and hymns, as well as the link for text to give, and all First Church announcements are available by aiming your smartphone camera at the QR code on the cards on the backs of the chairs. And now I would like to welcome Devin Rainbow to the pulpit for our spotlight announcement.
to remind you that next Sunday we are having a very specially called congregational meeting to address the recommendation from the board that we need to put the building and the property on the market, that we've reached the point that it would be fiscally irresponsible not to do that, but the board is not going to do that without the congregation being a part of the decision. And so the meeting will be about that decision, what brought us to that decision, but what's still working. We are not the building. We are a community. We are the people in the building, not the building. So the meeting will be to talk about what brought us to that decision, what ways forward that we have. And there are options, and there's plenty of work to be done. So that's what we'll be doing. Next Sunday, immediately after church, we'll move into the fellowship hall to do it, because we have another church that meets here at 1:30, and we're just not sure how soon the meeting will be over. So if you have any questions, could board members raise their hands in case anybody wants, or finance team too, if anyone wants to have questions beforehand, and I will see you next Sunday.
Thank you, Beverly. Please rise in body or spirit and join me as we read our call to awareness and amends and our chalice lighting. You'll find the call to awareness and amends at the QR code or inside the back cover of the gray hymnal. I will read the regular font, and you'll respond by reading the italicized text. We gather today at a crossroads. The place of many tongues. But we are newcomers to this land.
While native peoples are of this land. Adam, Chaka, Chemaja, Homa, Tunica, Lexi, Takwa, and more.
Know that we gather the spoils of colonialism and broken treaties. Acknowledging this history is just the first step.
We must set ourselves to task to repair.
Where we have harmed,
We seek to heal.
where we have taken,
We seek to give.
where we have disparaged,
We seek to honor.
just as the flame of our chalice,
Lights our way to beloved community.
we add life-giving water to earth.
From all the land's native roots and to nurture solidarity.
Only when we strive to make amends,
We affirm the inherent worth and dignity of each person.
please remain as you are as we light the chalice of our heritage, and join me in reading the words that you will find at the QR code or in your order of service. We hallow this time together by kindling the lamp of our heritage. And now please join me in our responsive reading, number 531 in your gray hymnal. Again, I'll read the regular text and you'll respond with the italicized text. The Oversoul. Let us learn the revelation of all nature and thought, that the highest dwells within us, that the sources of nature are in our own minds.
There is no screen or ceiling between our hands and the infinite heavens, so
I am constrained every moment to acknowledge a higher origin for events than the will I call mine. Every moment when the individual feels invaded by it is memorable. The soul's health consists in the fullness of its reception. Within us is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. By Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Please remain as you are and join in singing our opening hymn, number 75, The Harp at Nature's Advent.
Has never died away. The prayer is made and praise is given by all things near and far. The ocean looketh up to heaven and mirrors every star. The green earth sends sweet incense up from many mountain shrines, from folded leaf and dewy cup now pours the sacred wine. The bluest temples watch its transept earth and air. The music of its starry march, the chorus of a prayer. So nature keeps the reverent frame with which all years begin, and nature's signs and voices shape the prayerless heart within. Please be seated.
Good morning. We don't have the traveling chalice for today, but we do have time for all ages. Would all young and young at heart please come up and join me so I'm not alone up here. And we'll read If You Spend a Day with Thoreau at Walden Pond. I picked this up with my family up in Massachusetts at Walden Pond. Has anyone been there before? Yes, yes. It's a rite we all have to take at some point. Thoreau is Emerson's protege, and you probably know him from Walden and from Civil Disobedience. I'm going to try to read it. We'll see how it goes. If you spent a day with Thoreau at Walden Pond. If you spent a day with Henry David Thoreau, you would need to get there early because Henry wakes with the sun. You would look inside, this is his cabin, and see nothing but 3 chairs, a table, a desk, and an old bed. Yet Henry has just what he needs. If you spent a day with Henry David Thoreau, you would sit on the soft pine needles behind the house and drink cold, fresh Walden water. Living a simple life is the best way to be happy, says Henry. You would row out onto the pond, gaze down deep, and glimpse a beautiful gold and emerald fish. Swish, it's gone. You would help Henry weed his bean patch. I like to make the earth say beans instead of grass, Henry says with a grin. If you spent a day with Henry David Thoreau, you would head down paths that wind back and forth through leafy woods, but Henry knows the way. You would sometimes stop and listen. Shh, Henry says, holding a finger to his lips. That's a robin calling to his friends. And that gentle song is the coo of a mourning dove, and there's the screech of an angry jay. If you spent a day with Henry David Thoreau, you would wade in sandy pond and let the cool water lap against your feet and feel the sun on the back of your neck. You would point to a hawk high above, soaring and tumbling over and over. So wild and free, says Henry, and he writes it down in his notebook too. If you spent a day with Henry David Thoreau, you would hike past Fairhaven Hill, where the huckleberries grow, pick the ripest ones, and nibble them as you roamed. Yum. You would spy from your hiding place a mother partridge shooing her chicks under dry leaves. See them? Look at their tiny brown eyes staring out. If you spent a day with Henry David Thoreau, you would climb a farmer's fence, shortcut across a pasture, and call out to the cows. You would rest on the grass, lean back, hear the leaves murmur, and feel the soft breeze against your face. Henry calls it dreaming awake. If you spent a day with Henry, you would share a loaf of his homemade bread. After lunch, you would feed bits of cheese to a tiny mouse and laugh as its whiskers tickled your hand. You would follow a fox across the meadow, running far behind it, losing the track, but finding it again and again. Be quick, says Henry. You would lie on the ground, staring down, watching an ant war, red versus black. To Henry, little things matter as much as big things. If you spent a day with Henry David Thoreau, you would relax together watching late afternoon clouds that seem to float on Walden Pond. Ah, says Henry, smiling, from here the pond is like a wide open's eye staring up at the sky. If you spent a day with Henry David Thoreau, when you left, you would glance back in the gathering dusk and wave. You would see Henry writing in his journal by the light of his kerosene lamp. He would look up and call, "Remember, have an adventure every day." "Goodbye, Henry, and thanks," you would call back with a happy smile if you spent a day with Henry David Thoreau.
Thank you, Michael. Ours is a welcoming community where we find connection, a spiritual community where we find meaning. Ours is a sharing community where our joys are amplified, a caring community where our sorrows are lessened. Today, we will take this moment to reflect on our joys and sorrows and acknowledge the mutual support of our community. If you would like, you may come forward and release one of the blue stones on the table in front into the water and give us, if you choose, a brief verbal expression of a special joy or sorrow. And if you would like to place a stone of joy or sorrow in silence, that's perfectly acceptable as well. So I want to invite anyone who would like to share a joy or sorrow to come forward, place a stone in the water, and if you choose, tell us a bit about that joy or sorrow.
As sorrow, one of my colleagues, Lauren Guidry, passed. I don't remember the health issue. She was young. She had kids. She was a good person. She was an admin assistant, worked hard, got her master's degree, and became a professor. I was really proud of her. But her memory lives on, and we've created a scholarship for her. So keep Lauren in your thoughts, please.
Okay. Yes, I want to share a joy that I hope is a joy for the whole church. We have ordered Christmas trees. We are going to have a Christmas tree sale this year. We found a grower in North Carolina at what felt like the last minute, and they're ordered, and through the generosity of 4 members, who I will not name because I don't know if they want it public, they are lending us the funds to upfront the cost of the trees, which is $30,000. And we expect to make about $35,000 if everything goes as planned. Thank you. Profit, over.
Hello, can you hear me? Well, that took away some of my sorrow. I guess it's a joy and a sorrow, feeling how much the church has meant to us, raising our son Daniel, and the space. And I think my sorrow is, as I've been rehabilitating myself, I haven't been able to give the energy and focus to saving the building, saving the church in the way that I want to. And that became very prevalent for me today, of how I can be involved, because I've been thinking about healing myself. And so that's a sorrow for me, a deep sorrow that I haven't been able to do more. And wanting to see what I can do as I'm much further on the other side of healing. And the Christmas tree brings me joy. That just like, because it weighed on me, not knowing what I could do to help. And other members were there for that, and I'm grateful.
I have a sorrow, I guess. I try to think of joys. My children always are joys, but my stepfather, who is the only relative I have of that generation, both my biological parents died, but my stepfather is in a nursing home and has Parkinson's and is getting significant dementia. And it's just not fair, and it sucks. And that's my sorrow right now.
I have a very loud voice, so I don't
Use
need
the
it.
microphone. Use the microphone.
Do I?
It's our policy to use the microphone.
Policies.
It's for those of us who can't hear well. It's an accessibility
Hello,
issue.
is it on? You press it.
Push it up.
Hi. I have a joy. My daughter is 8 months pregnant this month, and she has been suffering with a terrible sinus infection that they couldn't clear up, and they were about to refer her to high-risk pregnancy and tell her that she was going to have to be bedridden for the rest of her pregnancy and have a labor-induced and a C-section. And the sinus infection cleared. We got the news last week. Huge joy.
That's better. I'm just back from Ireland, where I'm from, and there's this island called Inishkeel or Inishkowel, which has an 8th century monastery on it. St. Conal Cole built a monastery there, and St. Conal and St. Danin inhabited that space for many years. And each morning I swim from the shore out to the island. And this year it was really wet and rough, cold, windy for most of the time I was there. But even when the top of the sea and the sky are angry, underneath it's like space, and there are these jellyfish that float in this endless space. And it's, and I feel like sometimes I could just keep on swimming forever.
To
Hello.
So I wanted to share joy. I did this filmed theater project last year about the war in Ukraine, and I've been doing all this research on the Demeter Persephone story, and I really poured my heart and soul into writing one of the scenes of the play where my character does a healing ritual for his wife, and we were finally able to watch a draft of it. The film is like in the first draft of its editing process, and it just really brought tears to my eyes. I mean, it was, sorrow, but it was just like this incredible joy at seeing something that I had put my heart into, into fruition. So it was just not just the word that I was acting, but I was acting something that I poured myself into. So I was really grateful to see that. Yeah. Thank you.
I forgot to put the little thing there.
So now do you understand why I need to be in the sea for so long? Because the rest of the world is just visual and oral clutter. I'm like,
We can't hear you.
that's what you want.
Yep.
So I have a sorrow. I am a social worker at a residential program, and I have a client that I've worked with a couple of times now, and she seemed like she was doing really well this time. She's starting over in recovery, and then I got a call this morning that she left our program again to go back to not great circumstances. So if you all could keep her in your thoughts.
I have two friends, both of whom used to live here. One is now in San Antonio and the other in Maryland. And they are both women about my age, and they've both been struggling with serious illnesses for the last couple of years. And just this past week, both of them announced on Facebook that they were cancer-free. And I spoke with one of them yesterday. It was her birthday. And when I first got the news that they were ill, I thought it was pretty hopeless, and this gives me hope.
Thank you, everyone. We will now observe a brief time of silence. We will now end our silence and sing together, Voice Still and Small. May we join now in remembering those who have spoken, those they have named, and those we hold in our hearts. Please join me in reading our next responsive reading, number 661, The Heart Knoweth. We have a great deal more kindness than is ever spoken. How many persons we meet in houses, whom we scarcely speak to, whom yet we honor, and who honor us. Read the language of those wandering I-beams. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Good morning. I have no idea why they give me the keys to the car, but I will do my best today. And my name is Michael. I'm going to be speaking to you on Emerson and Unitarianism. Two caveats. I'd watch when Reverend Paul would give speeches sometimes, and I gather that you don't like long historical speeches. I promise not to give one. Well, what I mean is, I'm aware of the audience, and I will not give a long professorial diatribe. Secondly, I'm speaking on Emerson, and I don't mean to give a Unitarian trajectory that's purely Eurocentric, straight, and white, but he is an important part of our history, an important part of Unitarianism, and I think it's a story you're going to enjoy, or at least I'm going to try. So, if we were to think about what Unitarianism comes from, and when we took those classes with Reverend Paul, I think, and you can correct me here, that he would say it comes from a schism that happened in Protestant churches in Transylvania. Am I roughly correct? That before it was Unitarianism, it was a belief system that went against doctrinal church systems, doctrinal church teachings. Maybe we don't need an origin story. We're a living church, we're a living community. But this origin story is meant to communicate a little bit about you that I don't know if you know. Our spiritual home, I don't necessarily like that term, but our spiritual home is, as American Unitarianism, is in Boston. We are Bostonians. We are New Englanders. That's where Unitarianism was born, and that's where the story that we take place occurs, specifically at the second church in Boston in the 1830s. Just to give you a sense, all of the readings that I chose for today, all the songs, they're from New England transcendentalists. They're from writers who are working at the same time as Emerson. They were from his proteges. Our learning wing over here is called the William Ellery Channing wing. He is a New England transcendentalist. We sang a song by John Greenleaf Whittier. He is a fireside poet based in New England. We're reading from Emerson's prose. I couldn't fit in Thoreau's prose, but we read a Thoreau story. This is the beginning of our belief system, and this is where it came from as American Unitarianism. I'd also like to think, as we study transcendentalism and discuss it for today, that maybe as we are deterred by challenges faced as a congregation, that we notice that there is a longer view of things that will continue on. The speech that we're studying or talking about is from 1838, 185 years ago, almost to the day. I look forward to reading this speech in 2038, when First Unitarian is thriving and continues to do so. I don't know what your first encounter with Unitarianism was. I had two. One was visiting my grandmother in Pittsburgh and going to Thanksgiving with Unitarians. They were very friendly. I thought they were a little different. Like holding hands that before dinner and the speaking of one's joys, it took me a little while to get accustomed to. My second one was what we're doing for today. In grad school, we studied Unitarianism, but it was the context as an intellectual movement and not as a religious movement. Specifically, Unitarianism as an outgrowth of Protestant Christianity and as related to the American Transcendentalists. First, let me try to define. So, my first encounter was studying it as a piece of literature. First, let me define a couple things for you. When we say transcendentalism, I don't necessarily mean religious mysticism where you meditate like we do and go out and transcend your body, though that's part of it. The transcendentalism we're talking about is a mental transcendentalism. It is a branch of philosophy that's linked with Platonism, that is the belief that there is an ideal form for things, connected with Kant, with the notion of an understanding and a capacity for reason. But those are more abstract ways of looking at it. I promise not to go into them. Here's a more concrete way of looking at transcendentalism. They believe that nature is a symbolic language. In Nature, that's Emerson's first essay, he writes, "Nature never became a toy to a wise spirit. The flowers, the animals, the mountains reflected the wisdom of his best hour as much as they had delighted the simplicity of his childhood. When we speak of nature in this manner, we have a distinct but most poetical sense in the mind. We mean the integrity of impression made by manifold natural objects." I went out walking this morning and with my dog and saw sunlight piercing through the cypress forest or swamp that's next to my house. And if I were a transcendentalist, I would think that that is a manifold symbol of a divine essence made concrete in this corporeal realm. I just thought it was beautiful. I didn't believe there was a divine element to it, but they do. They believe that nature is a symbolic language. Thoreau would leave speeches and go look under trees and woods because that was a direct intuition of the divine. They also believed in moments of epiphany. Again, it's some vision. It's something beyond ourselves. You felt it. You felt it in urban areas. You felt it, as I have, in natural areas. I don't know what it is. If you know what it is, please let me know. But it was these moments of grandiose vision that transcended time and space. When you talk about divinity, the speech we're talking about, Divinity School Address, does mention God, does mention Jesus. It's not heavy on a Bible study, but what it means is that there's a connective tissue between the world religions and cultures. They are as one. When he says God with a capital G, which is masculine, I presume he also means Krishna, the Native American Sky Father and Earth Mother, the New Age elements, Eastern and Western religion. This would be the idea that consciousness is as one. All religions are talking about the same divine experience, all those things. All right, a couple more things about them. They created these utopian communities where people would live in equality as socialists. Sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? And grow their own foods. These would be called fruitlands, Brook Farm. I don't know if they ring a bell. But just to give you a sense, these are highly idealistic people. Bronson Alcott, the father of Louisa May Alcott, the more famous writer, did fruitlands. But as an idealist, he wouldn't let an apple that had fallen to the ground be eaten lest it be contaminated. And they wouldn't use like horse manure because it came from an animal. These are not practical things. So these are highly idealistic ways of looking at the world. There is this transition between the world of the physical and the spirit. They were part of something called the Transcendental Club. They would have been thought of as having radical religious beliefs at the time. The thing that attracts me to this religion maybe could be better stated in terms of Quaker religion, or this religion, this way of thinking of things. Again, I encountered Unitarianism as an area of study in early American literature, which is what I work in, but Quakerism is a little bit more defined. I've studied the works of John Woolman and Elizabeth Ashbridge, and I see it as being connected to transcendentalism, and here's why. The idea would be any one person can intuit the divine. They don't need an intermediary between the self and whatever else, they would call it God, that's out there. That goes against traditional religious orthodoxy. That breaks down the power structure of minister to congregation, male minister to congregation. But Quakers believe that anyone could have this divine revelation, this inner light. And it's an inherently democratic, with a lower d, way of looking at religion and spiritual enlightenment. And I think it's the same thing that's at play in transcendentalism. One does not need a minister, you need the woods to understand the divine essence. Let me tell you a little bit more about Emerson, and I'll read you a couple passages. First, some things that are good, quite good about him. This was from 1838, the Divinity School Address. He had just published Nature in 1836. He was becoming a celebrated American author. He's highly optimistic. But his second series of essays, which include the essay Experience, it includes The Poet, they have a tinge of sadness in them. His son had passed away, and so it balances his illimitable optimism with a sense of loss and mourning. And the second series of essays are, in my opinion, some of the best essays in the English language, right up there with James Baldwin, Joseph Addison, and with others. On the other hand, when we talk about 1838, we would have all needed to be part of the abolitionist movement. Emerson and others would have this difficulty. They wanted to live a transcendental life where they were just of the mind. He called this a transcendental thermometer, and not be necessarily of the world at times. That goes against what we believe as Unitarians. He did work against slavery. He had abolitionists speak at his church. He tried to have his African-American housekeeper sit with him and his wife for dinner. And he did write an essay later on John Brown. But he's criticized for not being as active against that large-scale issue of the time. Just to give you an example, Thoreau was put into jail for refusing to pay the poll tax that went to pay for slavery in Massachusetts, and he spent some nights out in Walden Pond looking for escaped slaves to assist them on the Underground Railroad up north. I'm going to read you a little bit about about Emerson, but here's a couple things that I can help you, it could maybe help, I don't know if it will or not. His essays have no thesis. He was a minister. These are oral talks that were transcribed in a written form, so there's no overarching thesis that he's reinforcing. He uses aphorisms, that is, concise philosophical statements. He uses large-scale allegories. There's one called Man Thinking in his essay, The American Scholar, which is generally considered the American literary declaration of independence. And he says that we're all broken. We're broken from the larger task of the greater good of society. He uses a body, man thinking, as his large-scale allegory. All right. So there's something I want to mention, and then we could look at a couple of passages together. So in 1832, he is the minister of a Unitarian church in Boston. It's the second church of Boston. I don't suppose any of us have been there. That seems to be our spiritual home. Boston is where the Unitarian Universalist Association is based. But here's something that he did that I admire. Unitarians at the time would have been traditional Orthodox, I dare say conservative Christians. We would have all been baptized. We would have believed literal literal miracles of Jesus, and the Bible was the authority, period, end of story. He was an independent thinker. In 1832, as a recently married or about to married person, single male, not of privileged background, he gave up his ministry because he thought the Lord's Supper was an empty and vapid custom and ritual. He almost said those exact words. The ideas of giving the bread as the body of Christ, wine as the body of Christ. He said he didn't want to do it, and this was not what Christianity was, and he resigned his pulpit. He did what he thought was morally right in order to challenge orthodoxy of the time. And so he became a writer, which was unheard of, and a speaker, a Lyceum tour speaker at the time. The speech I'm about to talk to you about, to go over with you, is from 1838. He gives it at Harvard in front of what we would consider Unitarian Brahmin, not just Unitarians, but Protestants. Harvard was the intellectual home of Unitarianism. It was the institutional home of Unitarianism. It was given to the senior class, and after he gave it, he was kicked out of Harvard for 30 years, despite being an alumnus, despite being part and parcel of that intellectual community. In this respect, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. And I think when we look at these examples, we can find a good sense for what he did. I don't want to overstate the case, but when he's giving this sermon, the Unitarians at the time, they're not the direct equivalent as sitting in front of a Gilead council in The Handmaid's Tale, but they're not too far from it, to be perfectly honest. Authoritative, white, male, power structure, they use one interpretation of the Bible, right? So here's a couple things that he said, knowing that they're sitting in the audience, knowing that there's all these men around him, and he is at the center of this pulpit. He said a couple things. And the specific element that I'd like you to focus on for this discussion is the concept of miracles, right? So here's what he says. This was Jehovah, come down out of heaven. I will kill you if you say he was a man. The idioms of his language and the figures of his rhetoric have usurped the place of his truth. And churches are not built on his principles, but on his tropes. Christianity became a mythos as the poetic teaching of Greece and of Egypt before. He spoke of miracles, for he felt that man's life was a miracle, and all that man doth. And he knew that as this daily miracle shines, as the character ascends. But the word miracle, as pronounced by Christian churches, gives a false impression. It is a monster. It is not one with the blowing clover and the falling rain. Okay, imagine sitting in front of that tribunal and telling them that the Christian churches were monstrous and that miracles, the first one, Jehovah come down out of heaven, I will kill you if you say he was a man. It suggests that Jesus was a flesh and blood man and not a supernatural being. It doesn't say it. He was a believer with a capital B. He doesn't have a worldview of looking at that. But what he means is that the miracles are not as relevant as the act of belief and love and helping the poor that is inherent in Jesus' teachings. He suggests that the miracles did not occur in space and time, in history. This is 1838. We're closer to Jonathan Edwards' times than we are to our times. This would be blasphemy. This would be challenging orthodoxy, and he knew exactly what he was doing. But he knew the courage of his convictions, and that's something that we have as Unitarians. We have our beliefs that are at our core of right and wrong, of love and justice, of goodness. And that's what he believed. So he didn't butter it down. He didn't tell them what they wanted to hear. He told them that life itself was a miracle. And he told them that the Christian churches were monstrous and giving a false impression. Note that the last line doesn't refer to some abstract biblical text. He says, miracles are one with the blowing clover and the falling rain, right? This is of nature. This is something directly intuited by one individual person, no matter their sex, or where they're from. It's the natural world that does that. There's an anecdote that he gives about the pulpit, and I'll read this and mention a couple more things. He says, whenever the pulpit is usurped by a formalist, then is the worshiper defrauded and disconsolate. We shrink as soon as the prayers begin, which do not uplift, but smite and offend us. We are fain to wrap our cloaks about, and secure, as best we can, a solitude that hears not. I once heard a preacher who sorely tempted me to say, I would go to church no more. Men go, thought I, where they are wont to go, else had no soul entered the temple in the afternoon. A snowstorm was falling around us. The snowstorm was real, the preacher merely spectral, and the eye felt the sad contrast in looking at him. And then, out of the window behind him, into the beautiful meteor of the snow. He had lived in vain. He had no one word intimating that he had laughed or wept, was married or in love, had been commended or cheated or chagrined. If he had ever lived and acted, we were none the wiser for it. The capital secret of his profession, namely, to convert life into truth, he had not learned. That's basically, for lack of a better term, describing a preacher to, well, he said he wanted to go into a snowstorm rather than listen to the preacher. It's giving a metaphorical middle finger to anyone wearing a cloak. It's challenging orthodoxy, and it's a moment of stark courage that I think is maybe the beginning of modern-day Unitarianism. 185 years ago in a church in Boston, saying that the snowstorm outside was real, the preacher was merely a ghost or spectral. I'm surprised they didn't feather him, tar and feather him. I'm surprised that he wasn't physically thrown out of the church at the time. I say that, could you imagine not telling your rabbi that you disagree with his interpretation of the Torah? Could you imagine not telling a Catholic priest that his belief towards lesbians and gays was incorrect? I can't imagine not telling a minister that they were wrong. I can't imagine telling them that there's a better way, a way that is individualistic, like Emerson is suggesting right here. Here's why, a couple things in closing. The method that he is using is called a Jeremiad. It's taken from the Old Testament biblical prophet Jeremiah. And basically, it's a way that early American preachers and ministers and secular elements such as politicians giving a 4th of July speech says, we are not living up to the standards of some forefather. We need to change our ways. And there's always a way out at the end. Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of Angry God is a theological version of a Jeremiad. It basically is a form of critique. His is for Christianity as a whole. And he's basically calling it empty. It's calling it, it says you follow the trope and not the actual person. He is ascribing personhood to Jesus, which would have been, as I said, sacrilegious at the time. The idea that he's suggesting is that Christianity needs reform, and he's telling it while some of the highest people in Unitarianism, and Unitarianism as a doctrinal force at the time was not a good thing. It was an oppressive thing. He's telling them that they're wrong. He's telling them that their interpretation of the Bible is wrong. He's telling them that Jesus' miracles are meant to be lived and thought of as a literal element. So in that sense, it's a Jeremiad, and it's a call to action. For us as modern readers of religious texts, I think it's helpful to maybe understand the metaphorical or parable element of religious texts rather than a literal interpretation, which is just my personal belief. So why is he important to Unitarianism? Why have I been talking to you about the Divinity School address at Harvard at its Honor Society to seniors from 1838 for much of today? I think he haunts Unitarianism. I think he changed history. I think if there was such a thing as a Unitarian sainthood, whether that's theological or secular, he would be one of the main ones. And I think he challenges orthodoxies. I would like whenever in your life you encounter injustice, when your heart tells you something is wrong, that you have the courage to do something about it. Emerson did. Emerson had the courage to challenge orthodoxy. He lost his institutional connection to Harvard. He could have lost more than the pulpit, which he had voluntarily stepped down from. This was courage of one's convictions, and that's, as Unitarians, the thing that we have to keep in mind, that we will hopefully tap into the spirit of Emerson and have those courage of our convictions. So I looked up, in closing, the Reverend Howard Dana, who is the minister, I believe, of the same church, and I think he's probably related to Charles Dana, the writer of the time. Like, what's the connection that Thoreau and Emerson have to Unitarianism? Thoreau backed out of Unitarianism, but that's simply because he did not want any formal religious ascription. Thoreau didn't want to be part of any society that was official. But here's what he says, because we follow Thoreau probably more than we follow Emerson, because we believe in individualism. Modern day Unitarian Universalism was in many ways started by Thoreau and Emerson as a branch of the tree of historic Christianity that we are now at the end of. This is Reverend Howard Dana. I don't think he means the end of Christianity as a religion, but as an historic religion that thinks of itself in a particular one way of biblical hermeneutics. I think that's what he means. This tree of historical Christianity is at the end. We see it as connected to the larger Unitarian Universalism that Thoreau and Emerson kind of started, American Unitarianism. He says, both are alive and well in UU theology and practice today. Emerson points us towards a unifying force greater than ourselves, and Thoreau shows us that we practice our theology in the here and now. The result of Thoreau's influence, Dana said, is UU activism grounded in self-reflection. Active self-reflection. I would chastise Emerson for not doing more for slavery, but I think we can correct that fault by doing more to correct social ills, abiding by our belief system of philosophy and love that undergirds Unitarianism. Once again, I have no idea why they give me the keys to the car. Thank you for listening to me today, and I hope you like Emerson. His words are like poetry to me. Like I wake up, it's like a lightning bolt, and I have trouble speaking when I read his words. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you, Michael. That's a lot to think about this week. Generosity is a spiritual discipline. We can now practice our act of giving either by placing your offering in the collection plate or by texting the word GIVE to 504-608-7030. And now Zach will introduce our special music.
I'm very excited to introduce Jefferson Turner, who will be playing the piano for us today. Jefferson has been a musical guest many times at this church throughout the years, and it's always wonderful to hear his contribution. And Jefferson will be starting a piano school in Jefferson Parish? Teaching music in Jefferson Parish School, so we're very excited to see this new development. Take it away.
Thank you, Jefferson. Gifts to this community of faith are gratefully received. Let us acknowledge these gifts by reading together the words in your order of service. This gift from the abundance of my life blesses me, our ministries, and the world. And now please stand in body or spirit and join in our chalice extinguishing, which is in your order of service. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, the good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. Its profession of faith, divine living.
And please remain as you are and join in singing our closing hymn, number 79, No Number Tallies Nature Up.
No number tallies nature up, no tribe its vows can fill. It is the shining fount of life, and pours the deluge still, and gathers by its fragile paths along the centuries. Placed and raised the rarest flower, its wreath shall nothing miss. It rides the past in perfect of trot and fire and scroll. A building, the floral seed, the planting of the coal. And steps of satellites and wings, and broken stars and out of sand and aged things, it formed the world anew. Must time and tide forever run, no wind sleep in the west? Will never wheels which whirl the sun and satellites have rest? Yet when the glowing wheels once more and mix the whole again, see fate of ancient elements, heat cold and peace and pain, blank war and trade and creeds and songs that ride in race on race. The sunburnt world that we shall greet of all the countless days. No ray is dimmed, no autumn born, the oldest course is new, and fresh the rose on yonder thorn gives back the heavens in dew.
And now we will sing our ascription. The words are printed in your order of worship.
May I who live be true unto my being, one in my thoughts, my words, and every deed. I was born free, an ever-changing river is what I am. Neighbor, so are you. We have the power through laughter, love, and tears to face all fears and live forever free.
This church is a place in our hearts and a way we live our lives. Wherever and however we gather, we bring and share the spirit of love and life. Let us invite that spirit to fill us now as we enter into our communities. Please turn and greet your neighbor.